On March the 3rd, 1934, John Dillinger walked out of the Crown Point jail in Indiana using nothing but a wooden gun. He was America's public enemy number one at the time, and this escape is one of the most brazen in American history. It launched the FBI as to what we know it now. And the official story is almost certainly not true. I'm Mr. V, and welcome back to the Hidden Lens. Before we get into the FBI part of this, you need to meet a man named Sam Cahoon. Sam works at the jail. He's not a guard exactly. He's more of a handyman who mops the floors and does the jobs nobody with a badge wants to do. Every jail has a Sam. He's the guy who ends up cleaning the fish while everybody else is telling the stories about the one that got away. And after about a week, you stop seeing him because he's always there. So Sam comes up to the second floor with his bucket, doing his rounds the same as any other Saturday. One of the prisoners waves him on over to his cell. Now, Sam has walked past this particular prisoner 100 times, and he knows the man by face. So Sam steps up to the bars like he's done 100 times before, and the prisoner sticks a gun in his belly. Well, Sam does what any of us would do with a gun in our belly. He goes like really still, and he agrees with everything the man's saying. That's what you do, right? And the prisoner, well, calm as a man ordering breakfast at a Waffle House, tells Sam to call the deputy on over. Now, here's the kicker. The gun in Sam Cahoon's belly was made out of wood, and it was whittled, well, it was a block of pine, painted up with shoe polish, and the man pointing it at him was the most wanted man in America. His name was John Dillinger. Dillinger was 30 years old that winter, and he hadn't always been the most wanted man in America. For most of his life, he was a nobody from Morrisville, Indiana, which is a farm county. It's about as ordinary as a place you're going to find on the map, probably where you and I come from, but not too far, but maybe not too close. His daddy ran a grocery store and he was strict the way fathers were strict back then. You know what I mean. Here's the kind of strict that comes with a belt. John was decent at baseball, but wasn't much interested in school, and he was a sort of restless. He was a restless young man who eventually finds trouble in a small town because trouble is about the only thing open at past 9 o'clock in the at night. The trouble he found was a big one though. When he was 20, he and an older fella tried to rob a grocer, and it went about as smooth as you'd expect from two amateurs trying to rob a grocer for the first time. John got caught almost immediately. His father, meaning well, told him to plead guilty. He said the judge would go easy on an honest man who owned up. So John did just that, and the judge, well, he hadn't heard about that. He was not in an easy mood that day. He handed a first-time kid something like 10 to 20 years in prison. That sentence made him into a different person. He walked in a dumb 20-year-old who made one bad night decision, and he came out 9 years later as a hardened professional, because prison in those days were less of a place of correction and more of a trade school for crime. Every serious criminal he would later run with, he met behind those walls. By the time he got out in the middle of 1933, the country was flat broke. It was on its back. This was the real bottom of the Great Depression, the same era that had Bonnie and Clyde running wild across the South and Babyface Nelson robbing banks from here to Chicago. Banks had been foreclosing on farms, and then they were going belly up themselves, taking folks' life savings down with them. And a whole lot of ordinary Americans had decided they hated banks about as much as a person could hate anything. So when Dillinger came out of prison and started robbing those same banks and doing it with style, cracking jokes and vaulting over the counter like a movie stunt man. Oh, it reminds me of myself when I was younger. Maybe not the robbing the bank part, but doing it with style. Well, Anyway, when he was doing all that, a strange thing happened. People kind of liked him. He was stealing from the one institution everybody already wanted to see burnt to the ground. For about 10 months, he ran wild across the Midwest. His gang hit bank after bank, and they were pretty good at it because they were organized and they were mean when they needed to be. He had already broken out of jail up in Ohio when his buddies shot their way in and busted him loose. So the man had a reputation before he ever got to Crown Point. He wasn't just a bank robber, he was a bank robber who didn't stay caught. Then in January of 1934, way down in Tucson, Arizona, of all the damn bad luck, a hotel caught fire. The fireman who came to put it out recognized some of the gang from their pictures in the detective magazines. Just like that, no shootout, no chase. The whole crew got scooped up in they got scooped up by a couple of Arizona cops doing regular police work. They shipped John back to Indiana to stand trial because he was wanted for something a lot bigger than robbery. Here's why. Dillinger, sitting in the Indiana jail, was a dead man walking. Well, back in January, during a bank robbery over in East Chicago, a police officer named William O'Mallory had been shot and killed. And the state was saying Dillinger pulled the trigger. In Indiana in 1934, killing a police officer meant sitting in an electric chair. No two ways about it. They're just going to plug him up and turn it on. So this wasn't a robbery beef where you do your time and come out in 9 years. This is a rope around the neck kind of thing. Or, plug them in and turn it on. If John stayed in that jail and went to trial, the most likely next stop was the death house. And a man who knows that has got exactly one thing on his mind, and it ain't his defense strategy. Now, they had him at the Lake County Jail in Crown Point. And the folks running that place could not wait to tell the newspapers how escape-proof it was. And I need to describe this building to you because that phrase was doing a whole lot of stuff there. This was not some fortress out of a spy movie. It was a county lockup with an attached house where the sheriff actually lived. Like an apartment stuck on the side of a Cracker Barrel. It had thick walls and iron bars, but the whole security plan was basically boiled down to manpower, meaning deputies standing around and the promise that a bunch of them would be holding machine guns if anybody tried to do anything they shouldn't be doing. The sheriff, he was a woman named Lillian Holley. And I want to be fair to her because she gets treated like a punchline and she really didn't deserve all of it. Her husband had been the sheriff before her and he got killed in the line of duty, so Lillian took over the job. That means you had a widow running a county jail in the 1930s, which took more grit than most men in that county had. And she meant it too. She was the one telling the papers that if Dillinger started any monkey business, she had 6 deputies with machine guns ready to finish it. And there was a prosecutor named Robert Estill. Don't laugh. You won't to in a minute. And Robert made a mistake that shows you the mood inside that jail. This is where you get to laugh. When Dillinger arrived, there's a big to-do with reporters everywhere, and somebody decided, it would be a fine idea to take some photos. And one of them, Prosecutor Estill, was standing right next to Dillinger with his arm draped around the man like they dating. Both of them grinning like two buddies on a tailgate. The man whose job was to send Dillinger to electric chair is posing with him like they're about to split a plate of nachos. That photo ran in the papers all over the country, and buddy, his laugh stock. It didn't age very well, they say. So that's the setup going into March. A man facing the chair with nothing left to lose, sitting inside of a jail whose entire defense is warm bodies and bravado. The sheriff is competent, but she's stretched thin. The prosecutors are already gone soft and chummy. They eating nachos and thinking about their second date. And the whole building has started believing their own press about how nobody gets out of there. Every single one of them was relaxed. And that's the most dangerous condition a jail can be in, because a jail doesn't keep men in with iron, it keeps them in with routine and with people paying attention. And by the first week of March at the Lake County Jail, The paying attention part had gotten pretty thin. The morning of March the 3rd was a Saturday, and it started as ordinary as a jail morning gets. 15 or so prisoners on the second floor were doing their exercise, which was the routine. A little movement before breakfast, pumping iron and doing other stuff. It keeps everybody from going crazy, stir crazy especially. 2 deputies were up there handing out soap and towels, the kind of chore you do half asleep because you already done it 1,000 times. And it's a Saturday morning because you know what you've been doing all Friday night, right? Well, Dillinger was in the mix, exercising with the rest of them. Nothing out of the ordinary. Then he steps back out of line and does something extraordinary. He pulls out a gun in jail, where, nobody has any but him now, the guards. And he pressed it into Sam Calhoun's ribs and told him to be quiet and do exactly as I say, or as he says. Then he had Sam call a deputy over. Well, the deputy looked down at the gun, and here's the thing. He didn't get a good look at it. And I'm sure he wasn't about to ask for a good look at it because, you don't squint and inspect a pistol that's currently parked against your kidney. He put his hands up, and Dillinger moved him down the line, cool and quiet like, and started collecting the rest of them, one at a time. And not one of those men reached out to check whether that gun was real. They probably come back with a splinter in their finger because every single one of them had a very good reason to assume it was, because dude's on death row, and he's going to death row unless he gets out. And you know what happens when you go to death row? You don't have a good time. So now Dillinger has a drop on a handyman and a deputy, and he starts working the building like a man who's thought about this a great deal. One by one, that's how it goes. Dillinger calls a man over, or a man wanders up not knowing what's happening to, shoot the shit, and he joins the group with his hands up. Lou Barker, who was the warden of the jail, gets called up and walks right on into it. Hey, Lou, how you doing? A whole string of guards and trustees, which is what they call the inmates that they trust to do little jobs, they all fold into this quiet procession through the jail. And this is a strange scene when you lay it out. There's no alarm going off. There's no gunfire. It's the most polite jailbreak you think you ever saw. Dillinger's moving through the building at a walk, real calm, herding grown men with badges into a cell like he's loading hogs into a trailer. Kind of like when you're at church and they start passing the plate, they just keep on moving down the way, calm and nice. They look at you sideways when you put that little wooden pistol at their butt or side or kidney or whatever. Well, these guys are going along with it because every one of them is doing the same thing that the first deputy did. That's public enemy number one, holding that gun. So even if there's a 1 in 10 chance it's fake, are you the man who wants to gamble your life finding out? Well, what's Dillinger do? He locks them all up. He puts a whole crowd of lawmen in jail into the cells that were built to hold men like him. And he turns the keys on them, and somewhere in all this comes the best details of the whole morning because the jail, it keeps guns, and Dillinger knew where. So he walks out of that round up holding not a whittled block of pine wood anymore, but 2 actual Thompson submachine guns. So now the fake gun don't matter anymore because you got the real thing. Well, let's see, he's got the Tommy guns in his hands, and there was still not one soul in that building in a position to stop him. And while everybody in that jail is busy not stopping anything, here's something you can do. Go ahead and hit that like button. It takes a lot of less effort than whittling a pistol. And don't forget that hype button. Now back to Dillinger, who wasn't even in a hurry. That's the part that gets me. He grabbed another prisoner named Herbert Youngblood, who was in there facing his own murder charge, and the two of them headed down towards the ground floor. Along the way, the story goes, Dillinger was almost enjoying himself and cracking wise jokes as he went. At one point, he supposedly gathered up some folks and made a comment about how he had done all this with a wooden gun, just rubbing it in a little bit because, the man couldn't help himself. He'd beaten the escape-proof jail, and he wanted someone to appreciate it. The last thing he needed was a ride. Well, that's the first thing he needed. And the jail, conveniently, is a place where people park cars. The getaway itself was almost funny. Out in the garage, Dillinger found the fastest car in the lot and he took it. And I'll come back to whose car that was in a minute, because it turns out to matter a whole lot more than anybody realized that morning. He and Youngblood drove off toward Chicago in the middle of the day, easy as a Sunday drive. By the time anybody got themselves unlocked and then raised the alarm, there was a lot of alarm when they were in the jail, but none of the people they were spreading the alarm to could do anything about it because they was all locked up. Well, the most wanted man in America was long gone down the highway by the time they got out. And the story that came out of that jail, the story that ran in every newspaper in the county, actually in the country, got told and retold for the next, 90 years. And here we are still talking about it in 2026. And eventually turned into the 2009 Hollywood film, Public Enemies, with Johnny Depp playing Dillinger, which is really, really good. I mean, Johnny Depp, they kind of made some things up in that movie. Well, it was a story about the wooden gun that got him. It's a great story. I've been telling it to you myself. A man facing an electric chair sits in the cell with nothing more than time and a scrap of wood, and he whittles himself a pistol, carves it into the shape of a Colt, and then blackens it up with shoe polish until it shines like a real gunmetal. He bluffed himself out of jail. Well, anyway, that's David beating Goliath with something, it's a chunk of wood and not a rock. So naturally it went around the world, and people ate it up. Dillinger loved it so much himself that he later posed for a photograph holding the thing up like it was a trophy fish. And for a long time, that was that. The wooden gun went to a museum. Folks would drive out and look at it through the glass, and the case was closed with a feel-good ending about a clever outlaw who outsmarted the escape-proof jail with his own two hands and a piece of wood. But there were always a few people who didn't buy it. And when you actually poke at the wooden gun story, the way you'd kick the tires on a truck that some fellow's is selling a little bit too eagerly, you start to notice it doesn't hold together as clean as everybody wants it to. And it starts with the wood itself. Where does a man in jail cell get a decent block of pine and the tools to carve it? These are not things they hand out with you for your breakfast on your breakfast tray. Then there's the paint job. Shoe polish on raw pine does not look like machine steel, not up close. It looks like a painted piece of wood, up close and far away too. It might fool a man for half a second across the room, but Dillinger is pressing this thing into people's sides, close enough to smell, and marching them around for a good while in a decent daylight. Out of that whole crowd, nobody got one good look. Are you kidding me? And then there's the biggest problem of all, which is the one nobody in that county wanted to say out loud, because the alternative to the wooden gun story is that Dillinger was clever. It was that somebody at jail was on the take. Here's what a lot of people who have studied this think really happened. They think Dillinger had a slick Chicago lawyer named Louis Piquet. And Piquet had some deep pockets and every reason in the world to want his famous client back out on the street. Now, Lake County in 1934 was not exactly a monument to clean government. This was Prohibition-era Indiana, where a certain amount of cash could open a certain number of doors. And everybody sort of kind of knew it. The theory goes that the wooden gun was never whittled in a cell at all. It was made on the outside by a carpenter and smuggled in. And the gun wasn't really what got Dillinger out. The money was, roughly $3,500 handed to the right people in a saloon on Main Street just down the block from the jail. The gun was the cover story, and that version makes everything cleaner. It explains why nobody looked too hard at the pistol and how a man in a locked cell got hold of a carved gun in the first place. It also explains why the whole escape went so quiet and polite, with no alarm and no struggle. It went smooth because it was arranged. The wooden gun was there so that afterwards the guard and the county could say they got fooled by a clever trick, instead of having to admit that somebody sold the keys to public enemy number one. Getting outsmarted is just embarrassing. The payoff is the kind of thing that puts people in the pokey, which brings me to the part I said I'd come back to, that car. The one that Dillinger took out that garage was Sheriff Lillian Holley's own personal automobile. He drove the sheriff's car out of the sheriff's jail and pointed it at Chicago. And here's why that one detail is the whole ball game. When Dillinger drove that car across the state line from Indiana to Illinois, you know, that stolen car, he broke a federal law. There was a law on the books called the Dyer Act about hauling a stolen car across state lines. And up to that point, it was the kind of thing nobody thought twice about. But it was federal. And that meant the case landed with the Bureau of Investigation, which at the time was the little outfit in Washington run by an ambitious young fellow named J. Edgar Hoover. And Hoover finally had the legal hook he'd been waiting for to go after Dillinger directly. You have to understand what Hoover's bureau was before this. It was a small operation that mostly handled paperwork and background checks. And his agents couldn't even carry guns as a matter of course. Local crime was local business, handled by local sheriffs. And a gang like Dillinger's could rob a bank in one state and be 3 states away by supper time, with no national force holding the authority to chase them across those lines. The whole system had a hole in it the size of a state border, and everybody could see it, and nobody had done anything about it yet. Then Dillinger drove a sheriff's stolen car into Illinois and put that hole on the front page of every newspaper in America. And Hoover, who was as shrewd a man as ever worked in Washington, took that embarrassment and ran with it as far as it would go. He used the public fury over Dillinger and the outlaws like him, and it was a bad era for banks and a good one for outlaws, so there was plenty of those outlaws. Well, he used all that to push Congress. That same year, Congress passed a whole stack of new legislation that people started calling the Dillinger laws, which made a pile of crimes federal for the first time, and finally let Hoover's agents carry weapons and make arrests like real police. Attorney General Homer Cummings was right there pushing the whole agenda in Washington. And together, they used Dillinger, the panic, to reshape the whole federal approach to crime. The little paperwork bureau got teeth and a real budget. And within about a year, it had a new name that you know really good, the Federal Bureau of Investigation. That's the mistake in the title. It's not a bigger one than a guard forgetting to check a pistol. It was a country that left the door between its states wide open, plus a jail so busy bragging that it forgot to guard its own keys. And the two of them together handed one ambitious man the perfect excuse to build a federal police force that they never had before. That agency runs today on a budget north of about $11 billion a year, with field offices in every corner of the country in a reach that touches down near everything. And you could draw a straight line from all of it back to one Saturday morning in Crown Point, Indiana, and a sheriff's car that should never have been taken. It should have been sitting there with the keys in it at least. As for Dillinger, the escape that made him a legend is the same one that signed his death warrant. Before Crown Point, he was Indiana's problem. But after it, he belonged to Hoover, and Hoover, he didn't lose. The Bureau's best man on the case was an agent named Melvin Purvis, who ran the Chicago field office and chased Dillinger down the hard way. There was a famous shootout up in Wisconsin called the Little Bohemia Lodge, where the whole operation nearly went sideways, and Dillinger slipped through anyways. But eventually Purvis got a tip. It came from a woman named Anna Sage, and the newspapers would forever call her the Lady in Red, and she agreed to give up Dillinger's location in exchange for help with her own legal problems. 4 months after Crown Point, almost to the day, she walked out of the Biograph Theater in Chicago with John Dillinger on a hot July night, and federal agents were waiting on the sidewalk. They shot him down before he ever reached the alley. The wooden gun's still sitting in a museum behind glass with a little card next to it telling the clever version of the story. It's a good story. It's just not the whole story. Now, if this one stuck with you, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the next one, and drop a comment below and let me know what you liked about it. I'll see you on the next episode of The Hidden Lens.